Welcome everyone. My name is Captain Sean, and today I want you to get aboard this vessel so that we may set sail to the land of Cenk's nephew failures, because Ethan of H3H3 Productions has for a second time destroyed Cenk's nephew on the issue of fair use, on the issue of copyright, and it's so funny to see him try to meekly defend himself from what is content theft, and that's how he built his brand, other than being Cenk's nephew, while being so sad, so upset, and so bitter about it. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored by Fume, by the way, so let me toss it over to the ad read, then we'll come back over here and we'll talk about it on the other side. Cold turkey may be good on sandwiches, but there's a better way to kick your bad habits. No, I'm not talking about going and visiting the witch down the block who's gonna throw some magic oil on you, then hex you and possibly your whole family and steal your soul. What I'm talking about is today's sponsor, which is Fume. Fume has an innovative, creative way to look at solving your bad habits. They think it's best to just remove the bad from your bad habits so you're left with a good habit. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. Instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. You get the point. Other things are bad, Fume has a bunch of good things about it. Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with magnetic parts that are great for fidgeting. This helps you de-stress as you're breaking your bad habits. Fume also has a bunch of new flavors: orange vanilla, which is sweet and citrusy with a touch of classic vanilla, raspberry lemon, a full-bodied lemonade with a hint of berries, and sparkling grapefruit, which is a fresh and cooling fruity grapefruit. Now, as you can see, this is the Fume that was actually sent to me by the company in order to do this ad read, and this is the Fume that I actually already owned prior to this ad read because I genuinely believe and endorse the product. And by the way, if you're curious about the taste, it's actually quite nice. The flavored air really hits home. What you need to do right now is join us in breaking bad habits. Go to tryfume.com/actualjustice and use the promo code actualjustice for 10% off your first journey pack right now at this moment. That is tryfume.com/actualjustice. Promo code actualjustice, 10% off. Break your bad habits. Go all natural. Fidget to your heart's desire. So for those of you who are unaware, I did a whole video on this before. Ethan of the H3H3 Productions got into it with a streamer called XQC, and to be clear, I don't know who that is, I don't know what we're talking about, but this eventually culminated in them having a debate, and even though a lot of people want to take XQC's side because they hate Ethan Klein, in reality, in actuality, from all accounts of this conversation, it was not a good showing from one Mr. XQC. Even though he prepared with Destiny, it seemed like he raged out, and it was not a good display. But the thing is, and this is what makes it so funny, while Ethan has been going after this XQC figure for essentially playing people's videos while not saying anything and being at the bottom of the screen, Cenk's nephew, who does the same exact thing, has been getting bitter and upset and has been getting sad, and he's been trying to make arguments against Ethan about how fair use is an abstract concept.
When I was talking to XQC and he said, oh, well, no, you don't react hard enough either. And you said this is why Ethan's argument is not good, because it always devolves into you don't react hard enough.
Because at the end of the day, there are no clear-cut guidelines, no clear-cut boundaries on like what to do, no like standardized best practices. And the argument always will, in the eyes of the audience especially, devolve into...
I don't think so. I think I circumvented that pretty good. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm not... I always do that.
There is no real guidelines around it. And honestly, you should be allowed to steal anybody's intellectual property because he's Cenk's nephew and that's how he makes his money. And if something benefits him, then it's okay, especially when you're talking about for him. But Ethan is not having it. And one of the reasons why Ethan's not having it it is because he went through an entire lawsuit based on fair use when Matt Haas claimed one of his videos, and he got a court decision which outlined specifically why Ethan was in the right in that case. So we have a situation, a rare situation, where H3 actually knows about the topic that he's talking about, and he's realizing how dumb Cenk's nephew actually is. And remember, Cenk's nephew once defended Pokimane, who was streaming episodes of Nickelodeon's Avatar: The Last Airbender, saying that that wasn't actually a copyright violation, and you should be able to stream those episodes, I guess, willy-nilly, however much you want, without any violation, because I don't know if you know this, but streamers should have god-tier rights when it comes to copyright. Ethan's not having it, and their back and forths are hilarious, because you see that Cenk's nephew is in fact the dumber of the two on the Leftovers podcast. I often thought that Ethan was the dumber one because he presumed that Cenk's nephew was an expert on anything, but in reality, in actuality, Ethan is coming to the realization that his ability to think even a little bit puts him far beyond the levels of Cenk's nephew.
So you watched the XQC thing?
I did. I stole it. I stole it from you.
Listen. Thank you so much.
Okay.
You actually did ask permission, which I thought was funny. You don't. I mean,
Well,
listen, you can react to it.
Because I want to make sure that, like, it's not cooking your re-upload or anything. You know what I mean?
So the first thing that I want to say, and this is hilarious, is that Ethan actually pressed Cenk's nephew to the point, and by the way, his last little argument with him, he said that he does not have permission to walk away from his videos while he's playing.
And it's
You do not have my permission to walk away from my
for the
videos.
record.
To the point where Cenk's nephew felt like he had to ask him for permission in order to view his debate on stream. I find this to be absolutely hilarious because Cenk's nephew was going from the position that there is no copyright to realizing that Ethan takes copyright somewhat seriously, so he ended up coming hat in hand to beg Ethan Klein for the ability to react to his debate stream. And of course, because Ethan is touching on sensitive subjects for Cenk's nephew, calling out behavior that Cenk's nephew is guilty of, it makes it extra funny how he has to come and try to convince Ethan without actually making an argument, because if he did make an argument, he'd be shredded immediately, just like he was in the previous episode of their stupid show.
It will always evolve into you're not reacting hard enough. Obviously, there are boundaries that I think aren't established, but like most people understand are bad.
There actually are pretty clear-cut guidelines. You have to do something that is transformative in nature, not a market substitute for the original, and oftentimes, in fair use cases, they talk about the heart of the product or of the thing that you would be reacting to or you would be using in your segment. Cenk's nephew's streams where he walks away and he's not doing anything and he just lets the videos play are not transformative in nature. They are a market substitute for the original, and they include the heart, the substance of whatever is being talked about or whatever is being covered in the content, because he's letting it play completely uninterrupted. This is not complicated. His business model is essentially the same as that Jinx guy, as any of those reaction guys that everybody hated on the internet, where they're trying to lure you in based on the viral video, and then they're in the corner, and then people end up following them, and then they end up building up a following. Cenk's nephew is 100% guilty of this. In fact, he's worse than most people on this issue, as many creators have reported that not only would he play their video basically uninterrupted, but at the end of the video, when it actually has the promos for the channel, he would cut that part out. So the one aspect that you can argue that this is promotion of other creators, guess what? He doesn't even do that part, or at least he didn't back in the day, because that's who Cenk's nephew is. Absolute scum through and through. But Ethan smartly decides to bring up the difference between YouTube, the uploaded VODs, and streams, because Cenk's nephew is always going to pretend like streaming has god tier rights to rip off everybody's content, and it's okay because you can't expect them to be entertaining, so they're just going to commit copyright violations rather than even trying.
However, especially if you're doing like long form content, especially if you're doing live streamed content without pre-production like you do, because you have your own version of that as well as like the members only broadcast. There will always be lulls and moments of like dead air or even you getting up, but that's also live reaction.
You know, I absolutely hate this argument from Cenk's nephew for a number of reasons, because he says, oh, well, if you're not doing pre-production, if you're not preparing before your long-form content, then you can't help but violate people's copyright while you're doing these streams. There's going to be lulls, there's going to be moments where you commit copyright violation, so everybody should just kind of get over it and pretend like it's no big deal. But the thing is, not preparing for a show is not an excuse. Prepare for your show. Stop being lazy. Actually cut up the clips. Organize your thoughts. Make an outline. It's not that difficult. There are plenty of people who go live on the radio for hours every day. This would be the closest thing to live streaming. And guess what? Their own voice carries the large majority of their show. This idea that, oh, if you go live and you didn't have enough prep or whatever, then therefore it somehow doesn't count when you violate the rules and you actually undercut and somehow get more attention than people that actually do that prep, then therefore you're good, makes no sense at all. This idea that laziness is a defense is ridiculous, but Cenk's nephew puts that forward because, again, he doesn't want to call out behavior that he's actively engaged in, because that would actually require him to acknowledge fault, things that he did wrong, and acknowledge that Ethan is right.
Here I'm talking, and I made it clear, I'm talking specifically about his YouTube channel. I wouldn't make this claim. Okay, well, that's something I made clear at the beginning. So so we're talking about his YouTube channel. Now, I would never claim that about streaming because I agree that streaming is too much of a gray area.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's ever even been tested, so there's not really any precedent in that regard. So, in the context of talking about his YouTube channel, I have to disagree that it's not about react harder. There's clearly zones. There's like S-tier zones, which would be, for example, I'll say one of my old reaction videos, which is like highly produced with sketches. It's like obvious, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a massive gray zone, which this podcast would probably even fall in, which would be like high up in the gray zone.
I don't think so.
Well, regardless, I'm just trying to show you what I mean.
Because it's pre-cut.
So Ethan actually grants the streaming thing for the sake of argument, which is a smart tactic. Give a little ground in order to make your point, and then he compares his old reaction videos to his podcast, claiming that his podcast now would actually be worse, and then Cenk's nephew weirdly brings up this pre-cut versus non-pre-cut thing, and again, this is his emphasis on how prep is somehow a factor on whether or not you could violate copyright law, which doesn't make any sense at all. Now, I will also add, and this is incredibly crucial, that Ethan actually supports theft in the real world. You know, at least when you're stealing intellectual property, you steal something, but they still have it. But Ethan has gone incredibly soft on theft with clips like this.
If you have a good job, you're not doing this.
No.
You're just not doing it. That's my theory, anyway. You know what I mean? Guys, and if you disagree, remember Aladdin, okay? Aladdin and his monkey.
Yep. And the bread.
They were stealing bread. Were they bad people?
No, they were not.
If you asked the street merchants, they were ready to chop his head off.
Right. But he had a heart of gold.
So to be clear, while I'm praising Ethan for calling out Cenk's nephew and humiliating him on this show, this is not a fully formed rational worldview being presented by him either. This is him going after Cenk's nephew because clearly Cenk's nephew does not know what he's talking about, and Ethan has experience in that realm. But obviously, copying something and using it for your own entertainment is not the same thing as these thieves that are stealing a physical product that the person who is selling it or would have had it no longer has because of that theft. So he has a very skewed worldview that theft is a-okay, perfectly fine when it's from someone else, but when it can affect him, it's bad. But what we're talking about here is Cenk's nephew trying to dodge and duck the criticism that Ethan is leveling at XQC that is clearly and obviously applicable specifically to him.
The videos that we watch are pre-cut.
That doesn't matter.
I think it does matter.
Well,
even because
it make Well, it doesn't matter. Fair use doesn't. It doesn't.
Oh
matter.
yeah. But I'm saying, like, the way I see it, your highly edited sketch videos, your sketch react videos,
those are S tier.
Yeah, those are S tier. This podcast would be like a little bit below it, but it still is like we're cutting this live, but every single thing that we're looking at, we already know what we're going to be looking at.
By gray zone, I mean like we can have a discussion about it.
Sure.
It's all debatable, and that's the nature of fair use. It's all up to a judge and jury to decide based on the merits of this one particular instance. And so that's what I mean. There's like a massive gray zone, and I would include like myself at the top of that gray zone, and then like maybe potentially even Sniper Wolf at the bottom of the gray zone.
Yeah.
So Ethan lays out his tier list, like your direct re-uploads would be at the absolute worst. There's a broad gray zone, and then there's the top tier, which is highly produced, highly edited videos. He cites his reactions, which, by the way, I actually think those reactions are good to cite because they're actually court tested, so we know they're actually in the clear.
The only element of the outside of the gray zone conversation that we could be having is that there, even in that situation, there's not enough data. You pulled up Vince's video or Vince's statement on it, but there's still not enough data on whether or not that is valuable or not, especially if like
Valuable?
certain.
What do you mean?
Is it displacing in the algorithm? Is it
What does it
good
matter,
for a
though?
mid-sized
It doesn't
channel?
even really matter.
Well,
Like, it'd
the
be
reason
nice, but it doesn't really matter.
But then Cenk's nephew starts going into this, there's not enough data, there's not enough studies, there's not enough scientific study data in order to talk about this, and honestly, this is just ridiculous nonsense talk in order to obfuscate the point, and I appreciate Ethan calling him out as he's presenting this. It makes me laugh, and it just shows what an utter doof Cenk's nephew is.
the reason why this keeps resurfacing over and over again is because there's inconsistency, not enough data on whether or not it is appropriate.
Doesn't matter.
And well, it matters because for the most part, creators don't either out
For
of
the most
fear, that they don't want to get into trouble with the large content creator, or because they genuinely see value in it, they don't complain about it, or they don't do anything about it.
So Cenk's nephew is hiding behind the ambiguity that these people don't claim it, they don't complain about it, therefore there's not enough data, and there's not enough people being upset, therefore somehow, whatever, it's justified that he basically steals people's content in a Jinx-like style in terms of his reactions and whatnot. But here's the thing. This is not a consistent stance from Cenk's nephew. Remember, he got mad at Nickelodeon. He got mad at Paramount for claiming Pokimane streams. They were mad about it. They did complain about it. They did feel like they were losing from it when she was watching those episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender. He defended her. He said the copyright doesn't really exist unless you enforce it. Therefore, Pokimane is in the right, Nickelodeon's in the wrong, and she's fully within her rights to steal that content. And that's the thing. It's kind of hard to argue that when you're taking content directly that was produced for big dollar amounts from these companies, like let's say something is going to be in a theater and then you end up streaming it, that does not take away money from people who, instead of going out to the theater, decided to watch it online for free. The thing is that this is really not comparable to what we do on the internet, but it all exists within the same space, and I actually appreciate Ethan trying to say that we should guide it by the same principles and the same rules. But the thing is, Cenk's nephew is like, no, steal whatever you want because he thinks it's beneficial. And by the way, in terms of the online sphere, it probably is beneficial to a certain degree because it could raise your awareness and all that, even though people like Cenk's nephew specifically go out of their way, or at least they did in the past, and he's received complaints about this, to hide where the content actually comes from so people don't actually grow as a result of this. But again, we're looking at a universal principle, and I do think that in some cases it's kind of inarguable that if you put it out for free or you put it out for streaming, then the company that produced this, the people who sunk the money into this, are losing out based on that. I mean, think about it. companies that make films that don't release them into theaters, like Warner Brothers, and put them all out on HBO Max, lost billions of dollars putting it on their own paid subscription service. So just think about if you're out there producing content and you're putting money behind it, and then most of the views go on some jerk like Cenk's Nephew's live stream rather than actually resulting in people supporting you. So there is instances where you can clearly see there's direct damage. You can hide behind the data. You could say it's promotion and all that, but clearly the chief goal of people like Cenk's Nephew is to promote himself, so he makes the most amount of money, and he does not care no matter how much is complained about or how much money is put into that. And a perfect example of that was the Pokimane Avatar The Last Airbender controversy.
He's re-uploading videos.
Yeah.
Period. Like straight up.
With very little feedback.
No. That's not even applicable. Like,
what are we talking about?
XQC.
Oh,
he
yeah.
uploads videos of him adding 0 runtime or like 2 seconds runtime, and all he says is, "That's crazy, chat."
Okay, Ethan.
That is a re-upload.
You do realize that conversation still turns into like, I agree with you, but even
Go
though
ahead.
I agree with you, that conversation is still like, I don't like the way you're reacting, and that can be expanded.
No, it doesn't, because
But it
there's
can
a way.
be expanded to someone like yourself even.
You're wrong. Saying this is crazy, chat, is not. It's not additive. It's not critical. It literally doesn't transform. You're sitting there, re-uploaded a video. It's not there. You cannot debate that.
I'll give you.
That's my problem with. I felt like you were running D for XQC a little bit when I watched you.
So right here, Ethan's talking about how they're re-uploading this and there's not even that much added runtime. And Cenk's Nephew says, oh, that could be expanded to someone like yourself, Ethan. And Ethan says you're wrong. And the thing is, the reason Cenk's Nephew is saying this is that this is all applicable to him. It's all applicable to Cenk's Nephew. He's trying to say that Ethan could have this attached to him. But in reality, look at Ethan's reactions versus XQC, look at his versus Cenk's Nephew, and you could see a clear and obvious delineation. But Cenk's Nephew doesn't want to actually defend his poor behavior, so instead he tries to pretend like not adding anything more than a minute or 10 seconds to a 20-minute video is equivalent to what Ethan Klein did in his reaction videos. It's just not true. And by the way, it's not even true on the podcast. I'm not a fan of the H3 podcast, not a fan of this leftovers nonsense, not a fan of Ethan Klein and what he's become on the internet.com. But to say that he doesn't add commentary, to say that people don't go there to see his reaction rather than the content that he's ripping is just false. It's wrong. It's incorrect.
It's not. You cannot debate that.
I'll give you.
That's my problem with. I felt like you were running D for XQC a little bit when I watched you.
No.
Yeah, because you're like, this whole react harder thing is kind of like you can't criticize anybody's.
I'll give you another example.
So I love that Ethan's calling him out right here for running defense for XQC. And I also love the fact that Cenk's Nephew on his stream can just say react harder. And the idiots in his audience, the ones that chuck money at him in order to forward the communist revolution, will just nod their head and say react harder. But when there's an actual person, even if it's Ethan Klein, even if it's H3H3 Productions pushing back against him, Cenk's Nephew immediately falls apart and has to pivot to another topic because there's nothing beneath the surface.
Technically, well, at the end of the day, all of this is entirely dependent on the IP holder and what they want to do with their IP. If they don't,
that's my point of why it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's why it's like that's why there's always going to be back and forth.
So one of Cenk's Nephew's strategies, if you can call it that, is to say that everything's in this gray area. And actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but things that you think are fair use are actually not protected. And he learned this from his time at the Young Turks, that unless you're commenting on the news piece, then you can't really use it in a narrative way in order to build your thing. And that's technically in violation.
If we're looking at fair use, like completely, the reality is that unless you are directly engaging in commentary on the video that you are currently watching, you can't even use it as a narrative tool in most circumstances. I know this from my days working at the Young Turks, and I know this from what I technically do in violation of like the actual fair use laws, even when I'm uploading my YouTube videos, right? When I upload my regular YouTube videos of a news, when I'm providing news analysis, unless I am directly engaging in media criticism, if I'm using a news clip as a narrative piece, that is still something that I'm technically supposed to license out.
So if you want to go after XQC and Cenk's nephew for adding zero commentary and ripping people's videos and using the size of their platform in order to intimidate people out of complaining about it, then honestly, you have to go after these people that use well-crafted and insert clips and whatnot and violate all this stuff, because that is just something that he learned at the Young Turks, and he's just right about that. That's fair use rules right there. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No. There is an exception for journalism and fair use as well. There's a clause for journalists and news stuff.
You still can't use someone else's footage to, like, for example.
I don't know exactly what you mean, but I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
So I love that Ethan says that. He says he doesn't know what he means, but he's going to disagree with him. And the thing is, Ethan is correct on this. What Cenk is saying, where he's like, oh, you can't use this, you have to license it and all that. No, you can use people's footage, again, if it's transformative in nature, not a market substitute for the original, adds commentary, or is done for the various purposes like parody, under the fair use guidelines. Cenk's nephew is just making stuff up as per usual because he doesn't have a good argument. So what he's trying to say is everybody's guilty, so that way you don't focus on the fact that Cenk's nephew is guilty.
If I put that clip in there and I don't actually immediately commentate on that clip or criticize that clip, that's technically a violation of fair use. You, especially if you don't license it. But
so I get, again, it depends on the whole context of the clip. But okay, let's say it is. So what?
So Ethan says, all right, whatever. Let me grant your stupid point. By the way, Cenk's nephew, a good way that you know that he doesn't know what he's talking about is the fact that he said it's a violation of fair use unless you license it. Again, fair use applies to unlicensed footage. If you license the footage, you could do whatever you want. So this is a category error. You often find this with not smart individuals. But Ethan says, so what? And we're going to get to the point that I've been describing he's getting at, because this is Cenk's nephew's clear and obvious avoidance tactic of the fact that he steals people's content.
The reason why I'm saying that is because there is a lot more that could be utilized. There's a lot more IP that could be acted on in a legal sense.
Hold on,
currently is not acted on.
The focus is changing. You're saying that IP law is too onerous, and I agree with that.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about the law necessarily. I'm talking about this notion that certain stuff that people do is just outright unacceptable and not up for debate, which I think that you seem to disagree with like React Harder, this whole React Harder meme.
Listen, credit where credit is due to Ethan of H3H3 Productions. He detects Cenk's nephew trying to broaden and distract from this. He calls it out directly, brings it back home, and says, look, stop trying to distract from the fact that you're trying to defend this by using this React Harder nonsense. Actually address the point. And again, it is amazing to see Ethan absolutely dominate, smoke, and humiliate anybody, let alone one of the largest, or the largest, I believe, political Twitch streamer out there. Cenk's nephew getting shook to his core by Ethan because Ethan actually knows about copyright law and he's not able to hide behind the trust me bro, I'm definitely an expert, look at the size of my Twitch following kind of tactics that he's been using to get things over on Ethan and a lot of dumb people for a long time. So if you watch this whole portion of the conversation, which will be linked in the description of this video, it's pretty funny. Cenk's nephew obfuscates, Ethan tries to bring it back. Cenk's nephew obfuscates, he says stuff in the most boring, bland tone in order to try to lull people to sleep and avoid the topic because he really has no argument.
I'll use this because it's not gonna, so you can see it. The other one is green. Cloud amplifier. When I put this up, if this is showing in the background, like this could technically be legally enforceable. Cloud amplifier could come and say, we didn't give you rights to use this in your broadcast. And like, that is
you can sue anyone for anything.
I agree.
Dude.
That is something that I'm terrified of.
It's a case by case basis. You can sue anyone for anything. You know what I mean? Which
is precisely why the conversation always goes back to: are you reacting hard? I don't like the way you're reacting, and then it's entirely in the hands of the IP holder.
Now, I also want to address this specifically before I get out of here, and that is this idea that, oh, everybody's going to be suing everybody if these laws were enforced to the maximum. The thing is, No, they wouldn't, because in reality and actuality, there's just not that much money in filing these fair use claims unless we're talking about serious damages and whatnot. In reality, most people aren't going to want to go to court, so this idea that every company is going to be suing everybody under every single potential violation is not true. We don't see that happening today, and most of the time, if you push back against these copyright trolls, these people who don't seem to respect fair use, they will eventually yield on the first or second pushback because the court battle isn't worth it all that much.
So you think that it's not straight up indefensible to sit in a box and stare at the camera while the video plays?
I think that it is. My personal opinion on it is that it is absolutely, one, not good content, and two, indefensible to do that. However, given that it's entirely up to the IP holder themselves to either make a claim, DMCA the channel.
You could say about anything. I mean,
but the reason
that takes the react harder thing. I want to talk about that.
Now, I also will point out that Cenk's nephew does this weaselly tactic when Ethan brings up an example where he goes to his personal position. He's like, me personally, I think it's reprehensible, but that doesn't matter. That's not interesting in the conversation. When we're talking about political topics or legal topics, you saying, me personally, I wouldn't do that, me personally, I wouldn't like that, is you obfuscating the issue. And then he talks about terms of service, and then Ethan again hits him, showing that Cenk's nephew knows nothing about the topic, with, no, this is a legal issue. It has nothing to do with terms of service.
So the reason why I'm stating that, the reason why I'm mentioning this, is the reason why a lot of people are still going to be confused at the end of this conversation, because no matter what happens, we are not going to end up with clear-cut boundaries, like well-defined boundaries that are even enforceable, not legally, but like enforceable from a terms of service, or enforceable through the YouTube structure.
There will never be terms of service because it's not a policy thing.
Yeah.
So again, we have Cenk's nephew obfuscating this whole thing, and it's just funny to see Ethan get frustrated, get angry, lash out at Cenk's nephew, and realize over the course of this conversation, hopefully, that Cenk's nephew is an idiot. He has nothing of value to add to the conversation. He's an absolute embarrassment, and this is who Ethan signed up with. This is who Ethan is promoting. This is who Ethan decided to share a platform with. Somebody who just shoots off the mouth, doesn't know what he's talking about, and hopes that if he says enough words, eventually you'll just get bored, and maybe that will be seen as agreement with him. It's absolutely hilarious to see two idiots get into an argument, but when one of those idiots actually has some experience, some expertise, it's really funny to see him realize how dumb the other guy is, because they've essentially been operating on this shared Dunning-Kruger effect, and Ethan has figured out that Cenk's nephew is an absolute fraud. I absolutely love this. That's why I did the part 2. It was definitely worth it, but you know what? Let me know what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think about this whole dispute. If you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Ethan versus Cenk's nephew, absolutely annihilating him. Till next time.